The moment Naomi Bennett stepped into the principal's office, the whispers sharpened into knives. She wasn't just a mother demanding justice for her son, she was a storm the elites of Waverly Heights never saw coming. By the time the black helicopter descended from the sky, it was already too late to undo what was about to unfold. Waverly Heights Academy sat like a crown above the rolling hills of Greenwich, Connecticut, its ivy-draped stone walls and soaring bell towers whispering of old money and exclusive privilege. The drive to the school wound through rows of manicured hedges and sprawling estates, leading to a wrought iron gate that opened only for the select few willing to pay the $70,000 annual tuition. Inside, the campus gleamed, emerald lawns, a marble-clad performing arts center, a library made of glass and stone that looked like a cathedral of intellect. It wasn't just a school, it was a fortress, built to keep the unworthy out and the bloodlines of privilege intact. Students arrived in black Escalades and silver Range Rovers, their monogrammed backpacks slung over one shoulder, their phones flashing images of Hamptons vacations and designer sneakers that cost more than most people's rent. Parents, clad in tailored suits and flowing cashmere, traded knowing glances at drop-off, their voices a low buzz of country club chatter and whispered judgments. Into this fortress walked Naomi Bennett every morning, her cotton blouse catching the soft breeze, her well-worn canvas tote brushing against her hip. At 37, Naomi carried herself with a quiet grace that did not seek to impress but could not be ignored, her warm brown eyes, her natural curls pinned loosely, her smile that hinted at both kindness and an unshakable steel. Her son, Calvin, 9 years old, walked beside her, his small hand gripping the strap of his plain navy backpack, his khakis slightly wrinkled, his mind already lost among the stars he loved so much. Naomi and her husband, Marcus, could have lived in any mansion they chose, behind any set of iron gates, but instead they lived in a modest colonial house a mile from campus, where Calvin built model rockets on the front porch and Naomi tended a garden of roses and wild mint with her own hands. Wealth to them was a tool, not a crown. But at Waverly Heights, appearances were everything, and Naomi's refusal to wear it like a badge made her invisible, or worse, suspect. Whispers followed her at every school event. "Maybe she's the maid," someone said one morning, their laughter slicing through the crisp autumn air. "Or a scholarship mom," another muttered, their diamond earrings glinting under the morning sun. Naomi heard them. She always heard them. But she never flinched. Calvin, too, became a target. In a world of $600 sneakers and private jet apps, his homemade turkey sandwich and absence of flashy brands made him stand out in all the wrong ways. The other children, led by Braxton Langston, the wiry, sharp-tongued son of socialite Vanessa Langston, dubbed him Charity Boy, a nickname that stuck like burrs to his small shoulders. Calvin, for all his brilliance about constellations and black holes, was learning the cost of standing alone. The parents noticed, too. At pickup, Naomi stood apart from the clusters of mothers in Valentino and Balenciaga, her canvas tote slung over her shoulder while they sipped lattes and compared vacation homes. Once, a flyer appeared anonymously in Naomi's mailbox, bold text shouting petition to protect Waverly standards, signed by parents whose names read like a who's who of hedge funds and tech empires. The flyer didn't name the Bennetts directly, but the message was clear: families who didn't align with our values were seen as disruptive, a blemish on Waverly's polished image. Naomi folded the paper neatly and placed it in her tote, her face betraying nothing. The mockery grew bolder with each passing day. At the fall fundraiser, a black-tie gala set in the school's glass-walled atrium, Naomi arrived wearing a simple cream dress she had owned for years, no diamonds, no designer clutch, just her quiet dignity. Other mothers circled her like sharks scenting blood. "Oh, Naomi, how quaint," Vanessa Langston purred, her red lipstick curling into a smirk. "Did you make that? Dress yourself?" Laughter rippled through the air, the sharp, brittle sound of people certain of their superiority. Naomi simply smiled, her eyes steady. "I'm here for Calvin's school," she said softly, her voice cutting through the brittle cruelty. But the worst was yet to come. During the silent auction, Calvin's astronomy project, a hand-drawn star chart, stood on a modest easel among glittering displays of gold leaf art and signed sports memorabilia. Vanessa and her circle gathered near it, their laughter carrying across the polished floor. "Did he use crayons from the dollar store?" Vanessa said loudly, pointing at Calvin's work. "Maybe next year he'll get real art supplies." Another mother, Sylvia Crane, snickered, "I bet he just stares at the sky for free." A father, Preston Langston, added with a sneer, "Maybe we should start a collection. Poor kid needs a telescope." Phones came out, snapping photos, captions already forming in private chats, "Charity art. Bless his heart." Naomi stood quietly by the easel, adjusting the chart, her fingers steady even as her heart cracked. She watched as Preston tossed a crumpled dollar bill onto the board like a tip, and the room erupted in laughter. She didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She straightened Calvin's star map, her back straight and her dignity unshaken. But Calvin's trials only worsened. In the cafeteria, under the gleaming skylights and marble floors, Braxton and his crew escalated their torment. "Hey, linen boy," Braxton sneered one afternoon, lobbing grapes at Calvin's tray. "Did your mom pack you dirt for lunch again?" The table erupted in laughter, the cruel sound bouncing off the stone walls. Calvin kept his head down, nibbling at his sandwich, each taunt burrowing deeper. In science class, when students were assigned a project on constellations, Braxton made sure Calvin was left unchosen. "Not Calvin," he said, his voice ringing out. "His mom probably thinks stars are just fairy dust." Even the teacher, Miss Kendall, chuckled under her breath but did nothing to intervene. Calvin sat alone, his notebook open to a beautiful sketch of Orion that no one bothered to see. One afternoon, it went too far. As Calvin carried his lunch tray to the trash, Braxton and his gang cornered him, overturning a tray of mashed potatoes and gravy onto his head. The cafeteria froze for a moment, then erupted in cruel laughter. Phones rose like a wave, recording the scene from every angle. Charity case got a new look. Braxton crowed, high-fiving his friends. Calvin stood there, gravy dripping from his hair, his sweater clinging to his small frame. His brown eyes burned, but no tears fell. Miss Kendall glanced over, and then looked away, pretending to check her clipboard. That night, Calvin came home in his stained sweater, his voice small. Naomi knelt by him, brushing mashed potatoes out of his curls, her heart twisting in her chest. "Tell me what happened, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft but steady. Calvin hesitated, then told her everything, the cafeteria, the laughter, the teacher who had turned her back. Naomi's jaw tightened, but her hand stayed gentle. "You did nothing wrong," she said, holding him close. "And I'm going to fix this." The next morning, Naomi walked into the principal's office, her tote over her shoulder, her blouse catching the morning light. She requested the cafeteria footage, her tone calm but firm. Dr. Evelyn Warwick, the principal, polished, smiling, perpetually anxious to please the biggest donors, leaned back in her leather chair, her smile dripping with false sympathy. "Mrs. Bennett, these things happen. Boys will be boys," she said, waving her hand dismissively. Naomi's eyes didn't waver. "I'd like to see the footage, please." Dr. Warwick's smile faltered, but before she could respond, Vanessa Langston stormed into the office, her designer heels clicking sharply on the tile. Her face was red with indignation. She pointed a manicured finger at Naomi. "Who do you think you are, giving orders around here?" she snapped. "If you can't afford to raise your son properly, maybe he doesn't belong here." The hallway behind them buzzed with parents whispering, smirking, laughing. "Look at her," one mother hissed. "Demanding like she owns the place." "She's got nerve," another scoffed. Dr. Warwick cleared her throat nervously. "Mrs. Bennett, perhaps we should all just calm down." Naomi looked at them all, the polished principal, the smirking queen bee, the parents peering around the doorframe, and said, her voice steady, every word deliberate, "You have just taught my son the most painful lesson of his life. Thank you. But I'll make sure he learns a better one, my way." The room fell silent, the laughter dying in the throats of those who only moments ago had been so sure of their power. Naomi turned, her shoes silent on the polished floor, her toe brushing against her hip, and walked away without a backward glance. Behind her, the whispers rose again, but this time they were different. Uneasy. Uncertain. Something was coming. And Waverly Heights had no idea what storm they had just unleashed. The heavy oak doors of Waverly Heights Academy closed behind Naomi Bennett with a hollow thud, but the echoes of her words lingered in the polished halls and whispered down the manicured paths. Parents gathered in clusters, their laughter now thin and uncertain, their eyes darting toward the retreating figure of the woman they had mocked, wondering, for the first time, if perhaps they had made a grave mistake. Naomi's cotton blouse caught the morning light, her worn canvas tote steady at her side, and though her heart hammered against her ribs, her stride never faltered. Calvin waited by the gates, his small frame slumped under the weight of invisible bruises, his brown eyes lifting with a flicker of hope as his mother approached. Naomi knelt, smoothing back his curls with a hand as steady as a lighthouse in a storm. "We're almost there, sweetheart," she murmured, and Calvin, sensing something in her voice, something fierce and inevitable, simply nodded. The rest of the day unfolded in the same brittle routine, the clatter of lacrosse sticks on the field, the murmur of tutors in glass-walled offices, the hum of espresso machines in the alumni lounge where mothers plotted charity galas and fathers checked stock portfolios. Waverly Heights wore its routine like armor, pretending that nothing could ever breach its perfect facade. But change was already humming in the air, low and growing, a vibration underfoot that the polished brogues and high heels couldn't quite ignore. It began with a sound, faint at first, like the rumble of distant thunder. Heads lifted from laptops, conversation stuttered mid-sentence, coffee cups paused midway to lips. A deep thrum grew louder, rolling over the emerald lawns and stone pathways, setting the crystal chandeliers trembling. Students spilled onto the steps of the library, shielding their eyes against the brilliant midday sun. Parents stepped out from the alumni lounge, their designer sunglasses flashing. Teachers clustered by the doors, anxiety pinching their brows. And then they saw it. A sleek black helicopter descended from the cloudless sky, its blades slicing the air with military precision. It bore no school colors, no politician's seal, only the stark silver lettering along its side, Bennett Global Initiatives. The name hit the crowd like a slap. Phones rose in unison, mouths fell open, and a ripple of disbelief surged through the campus. That Bennett? The Bennett who rebuilt telecom grids after hurricanes? The Bennett whose disaster relief fund had saved cities? The Bennett whose name graced the emergency wings of hospitals from Miami to Seattle? The helicopter landed squarely on the football field, sending a storm of dust and autumn leaves whirling into the stunned crowd. The door swung open, and Marcus Bennett stepped out. He wore a simple gray shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark jeans dusted from travel, no tie, no flash, only the kind of quiet authority that needed no decoration. His presence rolled over the field like a slow, unstoppable tide. Behind him followed a young woman in a navy blazer carrying a thick folder marked urgent, her stride quick and sharp. The gathered parents gawked openly, some whispering frantically into their phones, others just staring as if a phantom had materialized among them. Naomi stood at the edge of the field, her hand resting gently on Calvin's shoulder, her blouse fluttering in the helicopter's fading backwash. Marcus's blue eyes scanned the crowd, not searching, but judging, and found her immediately. He crossed the field in long, deliberate strides, the crowd parting before him like grass before a storm. He knelt briefly in front of Calvin, brushing his hand across the boy's cheek with a tenderness that made several of the onlookers avert their eyes. "You okay, champ?" Marcus asked, his voice low. Calvin nodded, a small, fierce nod, and Marcus rose to his full height, turning to face the sea of faces frozen between awe and fear. Principal Evelyn Warwick, her face pale, bustled forward, her pearls clutched in one trembling hand. "Mr. Bennett," she began, her voice shrill with panic, "I can assure you, today's little incident was merely—" Marcus lifted one hand, and the words dried in her throat. His voice when it came was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried across the football field with the weight of a sledgehammer. "I heard," he said, "that someone told my wife she didn't belong here." His gaze swept the crowd like a blade, making Vanessa Langston, resplendent in designer red, shrink behind her oversized sunglasses. I heard, Marcus continued, that our son, a 9-year-old boy, was humiliated in your cafeteria while teachers stood by. Whispers broke out like wildfire, parents shifting guiltily, teachers exchanging panicked glances. Dr. Warwick took a step forward, forcing a brittle smile. Mr. Bennett, surely this is a misunderstanding. No, Marcus said, his voice slicing through the false pleasantries like broken glass. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a moral failure. Naomi stepped forward then, her canvas tote still slung over her shoulder, her eyes clear and unflinching. From the folder, she withdrew a slim stack of documents and held them high enough for all to see. For 6 years, she said, her voice ringing like a bell in the stunned silence, my husband and I have been anonymous donors to Waverly Heights Academy. Through Bennett Global Initiatives, we have contributed over $20 million to fund scholarships, infrastructure, and community programs. Audible gasps rippled through the parents. Some clutched their pearls, others fumbled with their phones, already calculating the fallout. We chose anonymity, Naomi continued, because we wanted to believe that character mattered more here than appearances. We wanted to believe that kindness, intelligence, and perseverance were valued as much as the price tag on a handbag or a last name in the alumni directory. Her eyes found Vanessa Langston in the crowd, found the principal, found every teacher who had looked away. We were wrong. Marcus stepped beside her, his arm brushing hers, his voice low and commanding. Effective immediately, he said, Bennett Global Initiatives is withdrawing all financial support from Waverly Heights Academy. Every grant, every scholarship, every donation. A sound rose from the crowd, a collective, horrified gasp, followed by the frantic tapping of smartphone screens as news began leaking into the wider world. Furthermore, Naomi said, her voice steady and unshaken, we are withdrawing our son from this institution. He deserves better than a school that teaches children to measure worth by wealth and adults to worship cruelty in designer suits. The silence was deafening. Even the rustle of leaves seemed to hush, as if the very trees bore witness to the reckoning. Vanessa Langston, her cheeks blotchy with rage and panic, stepped forward, her voice shaking. You can't just walk away. Do you know what you're doing to this school? Naomi met her gaze with a calm fierceness that made the older woman stumble back a step. We're not walking away, Naomi said. We're building something better. She lifted the folder again. A new school. A place where kindness is currency, where no child is mocked for wearing cotton instead of silk, where character matters more than clout. Beside her, Calvin slipped his hand into hers, his small fingers curling tightly around hers. The helicopter blade spun lazily in the background, stirring the crisp autumn air. In the stunned crowd, more than one student looked on with wide, wondering eyes, eyes that saw, maybe for the first time, that power didn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply stood its ground and refused to be moved. Naomi and Marcus turned then, walking back toward the helicopter, Calvin between them, his head held a little higher than it had been that morning. As they boarded, the rotors kicked up a storm of dust, whipping around the field, sending the banners of Waverly Heights snapping like surrender flags. The helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the ruins of a false paradise, toward the horizon where something new, something better, waited to be built. And behind them, Waverly Heights Academy, once so smug, so untouchable, trembled on the edge of collapse, its secrets laid bare, its throne of judgment cracked and crumbling under the weight of its own cruelty. The black helicopter faded into the horizon, leaving behind a stunned, broken silence that wrapped itself around Waverly Heights Academy like a shroud. Parents, teachers, and students remained frozen in place, staring at the empty sky as if still trying to process what they had just witnessed. The air, once thick with smugness and whispered judgment, now tasted sharp and bitter, like metal. Naomi and Marcus Bennett were gone, but the reckoning they had delivered was only just beginning. By nightfall, the news had already broken across every major network. Local stations led with the headline "Billionaire Donors Pull $20 million After Bullying Scandal at Elite Academy," and by morning, the story was front-page news in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and splashed across CNN's primetime coverage. Hashtags like #WaverlyShame and #BennettReckoning trended globally, igniting a firestorm of outrage and condemnation. Parents who had once basked in the reflected glory of Waverly Heights now scrambled to distance themselves, frantically calling lawyers and PR firms to scrub their names from any association with the unfolding disaster. Within days, enrollment plummeted as wealthy families yanked their children out of the school, fearful that the stain of scandal would tarnish their precious reputations. Applications for the following semester dropped by over 60%, and the prestigious wait list, once a mile long, evaporated like mist under the hot glare of public shame. The school's carefully curated image, decades in the making, crumbled overnight. Vanessa Langston, once the queen bee of Waverly Heights' social scene, found herself shunned from charity galas and blacklisted from fundraising events. Invitations once delivered in gold-embossed envelopes stopped arriving. Her family's foundation hemorrhaged donors, and her public apology, delivered through trembling lips at a hastily organized press conference, was dissected and ridiculed online. Braxton Langston fared no better. The video of him dumping mashed potatoes on Calvin, laughing cruelly while teachers looked away, had gone viral, accumulating millions of views on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Memes exploded across social media. His sneering face captioned "The Fall of Privilege" and "Bully of the Elite" became symbols of everything wrong with entitled wealth. Colleges quietly rescinded their early admissions offers. His future, once paved in gold, cracked and crumbled under the weight of public outrage. Teachers like Ms. Kendall, who had so casually turned a blind eye, faced swift retribution. Parent groups banded together to file lawsuits against the school, citing negligence, discrimination, and emotional abuse. Ms. Kendall was fired, her teaching license suspended pending investigation. Whistleblowers from within Waverly Heights came forward with stories of years of systemic favoritism, bullying, and corruption. A former IT staffer leaked internal emails showing administrators discussing how to silence problem families and protect high-value donors at all costs. Those emails appeared on national news, damning the administration beyond redemption. Major corporate donors severed all ties to Waverly Heights, gutting the school's once mighty endowment. Alumni distanced themselves publicly, issuing statements denouncing the toxic culture they had once been proud to belong to. Within a month, Waverly Heights Board of Trustees voted to suspend Principal Evelyn Warwick indefinitely pending a full internal review, but the move was too little, too late. The fortress had fallen. Meanwhile, Naomi and Marcus Bennett moved forward with quiet, determined purpose. They announced the founding of Bennett Academy in nearby Stamford, a bold new vision for education. The announcement was met with immediate excitement, covered by every major news outlet, heralded as a revolution in how schools should nurture not just intelligence but character. Bennett Academy was built on the foundation that every child deserved respect, that no one would be measured by the price tag on their shoes or the designer label stitched into their jacket. Tuition would be free for half the student body, based solely on need and merit. Admissions essays asked not for resumes of summer trips to Europe but for reflections on kindness, resilience, and dreams. Naomi oversaw every detail, from the solar panels on the rooftops to the inclusive lunch program that guaranteed no child would feel ashamed of their meal. Marcus funded the project with quiet pride but made it clear that it was Naomi's vision that lit the way. Calvin thrived at Bennett Academy. His love for astronomy, once mocked and belittled, was now celebrated. In his new school, he found friends who didn't care about brands but about ideas, kids who cheered when he shared his handmade star charts and asked him to teach them about Orion and Andromeda. His teachers encouraged his curiosity instead of stifling it, and slowly, the hurt that Waverly Heights had carved into him began to heal. One autumn evening, as the golden sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the backyard of their modest colonial home, Calvin sat on the porch steps clutching a new model rocket in his hands. Naomi came out carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa, setting one beside him. They sat in companionable silence for a long moment, watching the first stars flicker to life in the twilight sky. Finally, Calvin spoke, his voice small but steady. "Mom," he said, "are you still mad at those people?" Naomi smiled, brushing a hand through his curls, her heart swelling with pride at how much he had grown. "No, sweetheart," she said gently. "They showed us exactly who we don't want to become. That's enough." Calvin nodded, his eyes reflecting the starlight, his soul already charting new constellations of hope and wonder. Inside their home, the walls hummed with life, Marcus grilling burgers in the backyard, Naomi's garden blooming with late summer roses, Calvin's model rockets lined up carefully on the porch. They didn't need marble floors or gold-plated gates. They had each other. They had dreams. And now, they had built a future that no cruelty could ever touch. As Bennett Academy opened its doors, families from every walk of life flooded in, drawn not by prestige, but by promise. Children who had once been overlooked or underestimated now thrived. Parents who had once felt invisible now found community. Word spread quickly, Bennett Academy wasn't just a school. It was a movement. A promise that in a world obsessed with status and wealth, kindness still had a place. Naomi and Marcus watched from the sidelines, never seeking the spotlight, their work speaking louder than any title or fortune ever could. They had turned humiliation into hope, cruelty into compassion, pain into power. And above them, the stars burned bright against the velvet sky, a map of endless possibilities that Calvin and his generation would now have the freedom to reach for. They had lost nothing that mattered. They had gained everything that did. At its heart, the story of Naomi, Marcus, and Calvin Bennett teaches us one of life's most powerful truths. True worth is never measured by what you wear, what you drive, or how loudly the world praises you. It is measured by the quiet strength you carry, by the way you treat others, and by the dignity you refuse to surrender, even when the world tries to strip it away. Naomi could have fought back with rage. Marcus could have crushed their critics with power. Instead, they chose a different path, one of steady, undeniable grace. They did not waste time seeking vengeance. They built something better. They showed the world, and more importantly, they showed Calvin, that the greatest victories are not about crushing your enemies, they are about rising above them, about creating spaces where justice, kindness, and humility can thrive. To anyone listening today, you will face moments when you are judged unfairly, overlooked, or even humiliated by people who think they are stronger because they have louder voices, bigger wallets, or shinier trophies. But you must remember, their power is temporary. Your integrity is forever. Never let the cruelty of others harden your heart or shrink your dreams. Instead, let it sharpen your purpose. Let it make you even more determined to walk with grace, to treat others with compassion, and to build a life and a legacy that no amount of gossip or cruelty can ever touch. The story of the Bennetts reminds us that you don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to retaliate to win. Sometimes, the greatest act of courage is simply to stand tall, to move forward, and to plant seeds of kindness in a world desperate for something real. On behalf of U.S. Edifying Stories, I want to thank each of you for taking the time to listen, to reflect, and to believe in the power of stories that uplift rather than tear down. Your support means more than you know. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Every time you do, you help spread messages of hope, dignity, and quiet strength to even more people across the world. Remember, when the world tells you that you don't belong, when it mocks you for standing apart, keep walking. Keep believing. Keep building. Because you are not defined by their standards. You are defined by the courage it takes to stay true to yourself. Thank you for being part of our community. And until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and keep reaching for the stars.